Alkan is awesome. A contemporary of Chopin and Liszt, this French composer-pianist penned some of the most daring, difficult, sublime and strange music in history, including symphonies and concertos for solo piano, preludes and etudes in all major and minor keys, and even a funeral march on the death of a parrot. The problem is that aside from a few works, his music isn't that well known, but there are musicians out there who are working tirelessly to rectify this, and recently I had the pleasure of interviewing one of them, internationally renowned pianist Mark Weiner. Mark is chairman of the Alkan Society and is partway through the monumental process of recording the composer's entire piano music, making him uniquely qualified to educate and enlighten us on the subject. I asked Mark a few general questions and then tasked him with selecting 5 different works which each represent a different facet of Alkan's complex musical personality. There's Alkan the Poet, Alkan the Magician, Alkan the Romantic, Alkan the Prophet, and Alkan the Observant. Mark came up with a fascinating and varied selection to fit these categories, and generously agreed to have his own recordings featured as well. Through Mark's scholarly insights and performances, we'll explore what makes Alkan's music so extraordinary. Enjoy. Alkan? How's that? Alkan? Alkan?
Alkan,
Alkan. I'm going to leave the pronunciation to you, Mark, if that's all right.
of course.
So, Mark, how did you first encounter Alkan's music, and what were your initial impressions?
It's really very simple. I first encountered his music when I was studying at the Purcell School, and it was the first year I was there. I think I must have been 12 or 13. And it just so happened that one spring, every year there's a spring piano course. It just so happened that that very first year, the focus was on Alkan's Opus 35 Etude and the Chopin Opus 25, and miscellaneous pieces by both composers. I remember being asked to go to the Hod's office and being given a copy of the Prélude, La Chanson de la Folle au bord de la mer, which we'll speak about, and being rather puzzled about it. I'd never heard of the name, and it was a photocopy from the volume published by Billaudot called Alkan in Miniature. And so there was not even his name on it. And I couldn't remember at the time who it was by. And I brought it to my teacher, Tessa Nicholson. And she read through it and she said, is this by Alkan? Anyway, that was the first time the name sort of registered. And I didn't really like this piece at first. And we both decided that I ought to have something a bit more substantial to get my teeth into. So I went back to the Hod's office, and I was proffered either Le Tambour Bateau, the Caprice Opus 50 bis, or the Toccatino Opus 75. I ended up playing the Toccatino Opus 75, and I loathed every second of it. And then the masterclasses came, and they were given by Ronald Smith. And then I heard the Etude from Opus 35 and other pieces, and then it was time to think again. I was absolutely enthralled. I'd never heard anything quite like this. And of course, you see, I started playing the piano very late. I started when I was 11, so I didn't necessarily have a great stock of knowledge to compare and contrast this to. So my ears were very much unbiased. I accepted this music on its own terms, and I simply liked it.
So that seed was planted, and did you have this idea of what you were eventually going to do, which was to record the complete solo piano music?
No, I didn't. I had no intention of doing that, really. I mean, back then, the thought of recording things had never really crossed my mind. I didn't know that I would ever be any good at doing anything like that. So I was more keen on just playing the piano.
Yeah.
When I made my first album for Piano Classics, that was back in 2014, I seem to remember sending several proposals to the director, and one of them included Alkan, but the only thing that he allowed me to do first off was Thalberg. And then I became interested in Thalberg for a brief period, and I made a second disc of his music later on. Um, I wanted to record Liszt, and of course I did want to do some Alkan, but it was certain works that I knew. So I did think one day, yes, I would like to record the symphony properly and the sonatine and the concerto. I mean, when I was in my college days, when I was at the Royal College of Music, I did make a recording of the symphony that I was quite proud of at the time in the college studios, but it wasn't me fully fledged as the pianist I am today. I was asked by my producer to record the Opus 35 studies, and I was rather reluctant to do this because I didn't like all of them, and some of them are really frightfully difficult and not the most rewarding pieces musically. That has to be said. So I knew that it would require a degree of self-sacrifice that I was a little bit ambivalent about giving. Nonetheless, I learned them all, and I ended up recording them. And I thought, well, I've done a big chunk of it, and it received some wonderful reviews. I was completely, really flabbergasted that it was A, taken so seriously, and B, people actually thought it was as good as they still think it is, which is flattering, and it gives you the courage to go on. And then I think I reflected to myself, well, why not do something else? And at the point I was preparing the preludes, I thought, why didn't I just do the whole lot? Why not? If it's not me, who else will do it? And egotistically, I thought to myself, well, could that other person be trusted to do a good job? Once I set the groundwork to myself and I thought, well, this is what it's going to be, this is what it will involve, and it might take this long, I thought, yes, fine, why not? It gives me an excuse to learn all of this music, because not most of it, I would say at least 50% isn't necessarily appropriate for public performance for varying reasons. Okay. And if one isn't going to play a work in public, there's less of an incentive to learn it and get to know it well. So recording all of these works gave me an excuse to learn them. Yeah. And that's very nice. A lot of pianists are and would be a little bit nervous about embarking on something like this because it puts you in a box. That's true. And other people might feel it could wreck the career they already have. My way of thinking at the time was slightly nihilistic. I thought, well, there's no career to wreck anyway. So I might as well just go ahead. And in other words, slightly less nihilistically, there's nothing to lose, but there's perhaps to be gained.
Yeah, of course. That's
better. And yes, there's certainly something that has been gained from it. And I have a feeling after about the time the fourth volume appeared, people realized, oh yes, he is going to do it, because sometimes these projects begin and then they fizzle out.
Yeah.
So I like to think that I have the confidence of the general public now.
Yeah, maybe you've already mentioned a few of the reasons, but why is it that Alkan is not more well known today? Is it a combination of social factors of the time, the man himself? Is it also the difficulty of some of this music, or the strangeness of it? What do you think about that?
Well, I think that's a very pertinent question, and there are many answers to it. It's quite complex. First of all, I think it's quite safe to say that he was his own enemy in the sense he did so very little for his own music. When he did program it in the Six Petits Concerts de Musique Classique in the 1870s and 1880s, he only played his own works in the intervals. So he was incredibly modest. He was very, very shy, and he simply didn't promote his own music at all. Reading about his life story, reading the letters there are, getting a sense of what he was like as a personality, he comes across as someone rather fragile psychologically, a very complex psychological makeup. I think Ronald Smith put it in his book as a man of fervent conviction yet basic caution, a bringer of light rather than warmth. these sorts of ideas, descriptions of his playing as well, it sort of tallies with this. When there were criticisms, it was lacking in breadth. It was a certain coldness to it. One gets the sense that perhaps when he was under any kind of pressure, inspiration might have evaporated, and he could have just been left with the sheer discipline. And with the compositions, of course, there are works like that which are disciplined compositionally speaking, but completely lacking in any inspiration.
Yeah.
And yet he was quite happy to publish these things. And this links to something else. Of course, there are a few composers like this. He was more than happy to write a work that would be accepted by anyone, and then the next minute write something so bizarre and so odd, and socially unacceptable, and that's enough to sort of throw people off. Eric Satie was a bit like that. You know, he didn't only write Gnossienne and Gymnopédie, he wrote some very, very odd things indeed. And he puzzled people, and I don't think he cared in the slightest. I don't think Alkan really cared in the slightest. Together with that, yes, there's the difficulty. So there are three factors here. The fact he did nothing through his music, the fact it could be so unpredictable as an idiom, and, you know, even experts will admit that he's impossible to pigeonhole. There are so many different facets to him, yet paradoxically, it's obvious that the same person's written all of these contrasting pieces. And on top of that is the occasional difficulty, which takes heed of human frailty. And it's not difficulty in the sense that, you know, Liszt's music is difficult or Chopin's music is difficult. It's when he writes an etude that involves a tremolo, it involves a tremolo and it goes on for a very long time. It's the same with octaves. It's the same with all these sorts of things, chords. And trying to wring the music out of that, and there is music there, again, it requires a degree of pianistic self-sacrifice.
So you talked about how impossible it is to pigeonhole this composer. Nonetheless, I think we should try. So we have Alkan the Poet.
For me, when he's at his most poetic, is in the quieter pieces, and the work in question here is the 8th etude, the Lento Appassionato from the 12 studies in all the major keys, Opus 35. And it is really one of the most useful etudes written by anybody. And it, as you will have seen, it touches upon a certain technique which is quite rare. There are few etudes that really address the problems that are tackled here. And it is a thing that myriad pianists shy away from and really want nothing to do with because it's not particularly ingratiating. And I remember studying this work, thinking, oh my God, I'm sitting here and it feels like I'm pressing buttons and going blind because one is sustaining with one finger a melody and the outer fingers are playing staccato notes like plucked lutes. And a song, for me, it's like a garden scene. It's like a serenade, and it's very much a duet as well because we have first the theme in the treble, then in the bass, and then they're united together. And that's a form which she embraces quite a bit. It's embraced in the Duettino, which is the first number of the cinquième recueil de chants, the fifth book of chants, opus 70. But as I said, as a study, it is incredibly useful. After having played it and recorded it, I felt like a changed pianist. It really did change the way my sense of control and thought and just listening to balance and lines. And when the two voices are together and we have two accompaniments and they're doing completely different things. Very beautiful texturally.
Absolutely.
And achingly poetic, and he uses wonderful terminology. I've forgotten the word. Bursting into flames is the translation. Accesso is the word. And the very ending of the work, he rarely becomes as soft and as dare I say sentimental as he does there. there's a moment at the end of the impromptu in F sharp major where he does something similar, and it becomes there's a real nod to Chopin, and also at the end of the first of the Petite Pièce, Opus 60, Ma chère Liberté, sort of improvisatory and free and luscious, and it's just the most beautiful work. If one has the patience to study it, it
Yes.
really is rewarding.
Yes.
Well, again, it seems unfair to select but one instance of where he exercises his magical powers. But in this work, I mean, it's an explosive toccata
Yeah.
based on three raw elements. Yet the way he develops them is just little short of genius. It's so marvelous and unexpected
Mm.
and inspired and utterly enchanting. Um, there's nothing quite like it texturally, um, in terms of the rhetoric of the music,
Mm.
um, the harmonic language. There's a tartness to it,
Yeah.
and the sheer audacity of the way how he takes these these bare elements and he manages to expand and contract them,
Mm.
through this kaleidoscopic lens.
Yeah.
And there is that frightening coda. It's certainly frightening to perform, where you really feel like you're being thrown across the room because of these octaves that are
I bet.
swarming all over the place. And I mean, when one gets it right, it's exhilarating. But it's just the most marvelous, extraordinary thing in the world.
Yeah.
Um, and when I've played it for people and they've heard Alkan for the first time, and they're just overjoyed that such a
Yeah.
thing exists.
It's so densely packed, this piece. I think there's kind of, whereas in the etudes you see a kind of focus, sort of both in terms of structure, also texture, one texture typically. Whereas in this, it's not a very long piece, but there's so much thrown at you. I have to admit, when I first I had to listen a few times to just kind of actually get all of it.
That's the other thing, because
Amazing.
events happen so quickly.
Yeah,
It's hard to take on board what's actually happening,
yeah.
because again, the trajectory of it is so fast moving.
Mm.
It does need multiple hearings. You're right, to make sense of it and understand what's going on. Um, but then that's the case for so many works, isn't it?
Of
It's
course,
it's
yeah.
temporal appreciation of, we listen differently when we know it. It's very special to me because it's one of the first big pieces I played. And its title, Chant d'amour, chant de mort, is clearly a play on words, song of love, song of death. It also has a small Latin quotation, et quando expectavi lumen venet caligo, which I think is a paraphrase on a verse from Job. But it's beautiful because it begins with an almost Mozartian aria,
Mm.
um, and then it dissolves into this wonderful impassioned cantilena,
Yeah.
which is it's one of the most rewarding pieces of Alkan to play, actually. And whenever someone's asked me, what do you think, what might I like? You know, what could I start with if I did learn something? I've often pointed them in the direction of this piece because the ending, it has his, the grotesque element,
Yeah.
yet there's enough of the harmonic lusciousness and pianistic charm to the writing that one would want. It's one of the most Chopinesque things he wrote as well, to a degree.
That struck me, particularly the tonic minor ending, like the Opus 32 number one nocturne. And I wonder if it's likely he did know the nocturnes.
Oh, certainly he did.
Yeah,
He did. Though as far as I'm aware, he only played Opus 48 number one in public.
okay.
But oh yes, he would have
Yes.
certainly known them. I had never thought about that parallel, and yet I played that piece. Interesting. It hadn't occurred to me. Well, of course, by the end of the work, there's a thematic, well, transformation.
Mm. And a
And
really haunting kind of just before it happens, two little kind of attempts to rekindle the tune proper, and then
little attempts to get going, and then
yeah,
it descends into a funeral march.
so not a very happy ending.
No, no, and it's strange. People react to it differently. Some people find it rather funny.
Yeah. Is there an
Uh,
element of that though? Especially your latest CD, the grotesques and the slight, I don't know.
oh, sometimes it's tongue in cheek. I think in this
Yeah,
instance, it's very serious
yeah,
because of the very ending. The fact it closes on that 6/3 chord.
mm,
Um,
yeah,
well, yeah, 6/4 going to a 6/3 chord. So there's a sense of a final cry of anguish. I think it is serious. It's just like so much of this sort of programmatic repertoire. One has to be very dramatically convincing
yes, yeah,
at the keyboard. It can't just be played. It doesn't
mm,
play itself. It has to be choreographed to a certain degree,
yeah,
and that will always depend on the hall we're in. A million factors. What we've had for dinner.
yeah,
You know.
yeah.
Again, there's nothing quite like this piece. It's the eighth of the 25 Prélude, and it's entitled La chanson de la folle au bord de la mer. So the song of the madwoman on the seashore. Um, to my mind, I've often felt it was a sort of Turner in music.
Mm,
And going back to the use of this vast tessitura between the hands
yeah.
creates an immense sense of open space. One can imagine a sort of infinite sky, an extraordinarily distant horizon and the tide out, and some wraith-like figure coming towards us, you know, muttering this strange song,
Yeah.
and then receding into the distance as she passes us. And then, of course, the song becomes fractured, and we only catch snatches of it. Nothing like it.
No. I'm just
But
getting chills you describing it, let alone hearing you play it. It's chilling, yeah.
yes, absolutely. And you touched upon a point. Uh, why is it so much more disturbing when the tune is in the major? Well, I think there is an answer to that. The very fact that the theme follows a hypnotic rhythmic outline
Mm.
in the minor is quite acceptable. But as soon as it does the same thing in a happy key, it
Yeah.
starts to worry us.
Yeah, expressionless
Yeah.
still. Yeah. Yeah.
Absolutely. And the other salient point I really must make about this is that anybody who plays it or wants to play it, that they consult the first edition and that they please play G flats and not F flats. They'll know the bit I'm talking about.
Hmm.
It uses flattened sevenths, but there have been two recordings so far by eminent pianists which have used a faulty score online,
Mm.
which has clearly been made by a dodgy scanner,
Mm.
which have been known to do funny things with staves and ledger lines.
Hmm.
So by playing F flats, it completely robs it of its folk-like element with the flattened sevenths. So we need G flats, and it's very obvious where that moment occurs.
In their defense and in the scanner's defense, there is also a bit of a reputation with Alcon with flats and accidentals and double flats and triple flats. Um, that's not that could be another category, I suppose. Alcon
That's a whole other can of
the
worms.
triple flat. I
Yes.
don't know if we'll see that many in these pieces, maybe a couple.
Well, there's only one triple sharp I know of, and of
That's
the
quite enough, isn't it?
that's in the fugue of Quasi Faust. But yes,
And why is Alcon not more well known? I think we're sort of
but then, of course, if you look at it in the context, it's perfectly logical. He's modulated to E sharp major. Well, for this work, Ancienne Mélodie de la Synagogue, it's number 6 of the Preludes. We're not entirely sure whether it is based on a Hebraic theme per se, though it does bear a striking resemblance to a type of Hasidic dance called Rikud. And that tune has been recorded in a book by Naumburg, and it's a book of popular religious songs of the Israelites. That's the title of the work. So in certain corners, there's a striking resemblance, and he almost certainly must have known it. I'm not sure. He could have been subconsciously.
Yeah.
That he, yeah. It is also based on a cantorial mode called Ahava Rabba in Hebrew, I believe. And that consists of a flattened supertonic and a flattened submediant note, so in a major scale.
Yeah.
So it would have D, E flat, F sharp, G, A, B flat, C, and D.
Yeah.
So it's an authentic cantorial mode, and he would have heard all of these in the synagogue. In any case, it's a very beautiful, quietly reflective work. And I remember when I first played it to my late professor Neil Immelman, he really felt it was up there. He thought it was just top as a work, and it was just so nice to have that sort of that sense of yes, I won someone over.
Yeah, I'm sure you'll win over many more. But I just want to thank you, Mark, for talking with me today. It's been utterly fascinating, and as someone who can't say I've even scratched the surface of this amazing music, it's been a real privilege to kind of have my hand held. Um, and I think for the audience as well, I wish you all the best with the remaining CDs, however long it takes you. I don't know, maybe we could find a few more categories in future.
I would
Alcon,
absolutely love
Alcon
that.
the triple sharp, perhaps.
Oh
Yeah,
yes.
best of luck. Perhaps could you tell everyone again, if it didn't make it in earlier, could you tell everyone what's coming up with you, Alcon or otherwise, and maybe where people can find out more about your work?
Well, everything I've done, and in terms of the Alkan project and Alkan Besides is on my website, which is markbiner.com. But generally speaking, the next volume to appear is volume 7, and that's all of the early works and juvenilia. So it's, for the most part, it's rondos and variation sets, some of which are really rather difficult. Um, it's extraordinary how difficult music by a 13-year-old can be. But trust me, it really can. And aside from that, the next release I have coming out is a recording of Liszt's Weihnachtsbaum and two movements from Christus, arranged with piano by him. So it consists of the Shepherds at the Manger and the March of the Holy Three Kings. And that will be coming out around Christmas. And again, this constituted some of the padding to the great deal of Alkan that
Yeah,
flows through my ears and fingers. Um, so that's it really.
brilliant.
Aside from that, the other thing that keeps me going is the wonderful responses from the public. It's real encouragement, and it makes it all the more worthwhile.
It's very, very well deserved. Incredible stuff. Thanks again, Mark.